Let's get you more then on that announcement that we're expecting from the Trump administration. It's supposed to happen in about 2 hours or so. Bring in our U.S. correspondent, Sherwin Bryce-Pease, who's live in New York. Sherwin, good to see you. The announcement by Trump tonight has already been dubbed Liberation Day for the U.S. Make America Wealthy Again is another slogan, but nothing appears certain at this stage, given just how edgy the markets have been in the lead up to the actual announcement.
Well, let's just point to how the U.S. media, Tembekile, has asserted this very uncertain narrative that is emanating from this very big moment, right? Liberation Day, make America wealthy again. But we don't have the details, the very fine details as to how that will happen. But let's just give you a run through, a snapshot of how U.S. media is covering this moment. The New York Times, Trump is set to unveil expansive global tariffs. The president on Wednesday will announce sweeping tariffs that he says will restore fairness to the global trading system. The Wall Street Journal, stocks slip ahead of Trump's tariff announcement. Stocks traded lower with investors on edge about President Trump's coming tariff announcement. The Associated Press, Trump is said to announce reciprocal tariffs in a risky move that could reshape the economy. The Washington Post, Trump aides draft tariff plans as some experts warn of economic damage. CBS News, Trump to announce new tariffs today on what he calls Liberation Day amid fears of higher prices. NBC News, Trump's Liberation Day unfolds with new reciprocal tariffs sparking fear and uncertainty. ABC News, Trump's Liberation Day arrives as he gambles big on risky tariff policy. And CNN, Trump has the world on edge as he mulls fateful tariffs decades into the making. Let's choreograph for you now what we expect at around 10 p.m. Central African time. The president will speak in the Rose Garden. We are told that he'll be joined by workers from certain industries that will be affected directly by his reciprocal tariff announcement. We are told steel workers, auto workers, oil and gas workers, steam fitters, truck drivers, among the other trades and sectors that will be represented there. And of course then to the details, right? What exactly are we expecting? There are a number of scenarios here, none which is certain here, but it's certainly reflective, that uncertainty reflective in what we are seeing in the markets. Very stagnant today, very stagnant yesterday, but of course the last quarter in terms of the S&P 500 and the NASDAQ composite delivering its worst results in the last quarter since 2022, and of course wiping out all the gains that has been attributed to Trump's election in November last year. So essentially all the gains that have been racked up since Trump's November election week have been wiped out by the uncertainty that surrounds his America First economic policy that is really not clear even to some people in the White House, we understand.
As you say that, Sherwin, I'm looking at the figures. In fact, U.S. stocks that had opened sharply lower today. In fact, what's been raised in the last few months, about $5 trillion of value since February. But as we wait for the announcement, and you use the language right now about how we're expecting an announcement of reciprocal tariffs, but we've also been hearing that trade deficits might also be factored into the U.S. president's decision. Are we clear on which countries are likely to be in the firing line?
So we've heard from the Office of the Trade Representative that G20 countries in the main are in the firing line, yeah, and of course South Africa, current G20 president, very much in the mix. The Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent in various interviews talked about, the top 15 countries in terms of deficits. That largely speaks to the G20. I'll just read you a little bit from the U.S. Trade Representative's office, a note that was sent out in terms of Trump's memorandum seeking to address unfair trade practices. This is what it says. USTR is pursuing a review of all countries consistent with the president's instruction. USTR is particularly interested in submissions related to the largest trading economies such as G20 countries, as well as those economies that have the largest trade deficits in goods with the United States. We spoke yesterday that South Africa enjoys an over $8 billion trade deficit with the United States. So that certainly portends very negatively for Pretoria in this very complex political moment that it enjoys with the United States. It then lists countries including Argentina, Australia, Brazil, Canada, China, the EU, India, and the list goes on, including South Africa, Switzerland, Taiwan, and Thailand. So South Africa very much in the mix. So I imagine a lot of government officials, economists sitting on the edge of their seats tonight waiting for that Trump announcement. And then to the specifics, right? We've heard different scenarios here. It could be a blanket 20% tariffs on all goods that are being imported into the United States, which will have rippling effects across the global economy. And then you mentioned, right, reciprocal tariffs, essentially what a country then imposes on the United States in terms of tariffs for U.S. goods going into a country. The U.S. then will respond in kind. And then we've also heard different scenarios around this notion of a country's deficit and how a country that enjoys a deficit with the United States will then also receive some sort of tariff here in an effort by the U.S. to address this deficit. So those are the three scenarios. Which one the president lands on remains unclear. And as we've been talking here, he might, there might be a differential here in terms of, 20% for you, reciprocal for you, and something in between for the next. We don't know. We'll have to wait and see.
I'm curious, though, Sherwin, about how nervous the American business community might be, considering that in some corners of the world, we know the decision is not going to be taken lightly. The Europeans have said they've got a hand of cards to play as well. China has not shied away, even in the previous Trump presidency, from imposing sanctions, not even sanctions, but tariffs of its own, whenever the Americans have done so in reverse.
Well, what you are seeing here is essentially the United States president undermining free trade agreements that exist with various nations. There's a three-way trade agreement between the United States, Canada, and Mexico that has now been upended by his tariffs on energy, by his tariffs on steel and aluminium, auto tariffs, the auto industry also buckling under the uncertainty here. But you've also then seen the posture from blocs like the European Union. You mentioned China. We've been talking also about how China is forging alliances with Japan and South Korea in terms of, developing their supply chain. So the responses are going to be there. The concern here is for weaker economies, right? Developing economies that are not perhaps part of major trade pacts. How are they going to be impacted? There are questions as to the unilateral nature of these tariffs that undermine trade pacts like the African Growth and Opportunity Act. You saw the Trade, Industry and Competition Minister Park Stow yesterday talk about the imposition of the aluminium and steel tariffs, the imposition of tariffs on the auto industry, and how that is going to affect South African exports in terms of the auto industry, which account for around 60% of AGOA right now. So the implications here are very uncertain, but they tend to lean towards the negative in terms of how the global economy is going to react here. And of course, understand that there is a world global trading system in place. It is governed by the World Trade Organization that accounts for about 75% of global trade. Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, the Director General of the WTO, in a conversation and an interview with Reuters this week, saying the following: the bedrock of trade is here and it's going nowhere. And when she talks about the bedrock of trade, she's referring, of course, to globalization. This is what guarantees stability, predictability, and members know it, including the United States. So how the world pushes back here is going to be interesting. How the Trump administration asserts itself is going to be interesting. And where the chips might fall remains anyone's guess for now.
Sherwin Bryce-Pease, SABC News correspondent, live for us in New York. Thank you so much for your time tonight.